Hi, my name is Patrick Kuchio, the head of missions at Christ is the Answer Ministries, CITAM. Welcome to CITAM ChurchOnline Youth Cafe. Last Sunday, we began a series on the life God blesses. Now, have you ever wondered, why should anybody make a fuss about the life that God blesses? Why would anybody really be keen to value the blessing of God over their life? Well, let's keep this conversation going right here on CITAM Church Online. Why would anybody value or place a high premium on the blessing of God? Why should we be so concerned about the blessing of God? Why should we be obsessed about the blessing of God? You see, I'll give you 4 reasons. Number 1, the blessing of God is the greatest differentiator in life. The blessing of God is the greatest differentiator in life. A story is told in the Bible of the 10 plagues that befell the land of Egypt when God had sent Moses to Pharaoh with a message, "Let my people go." But God allowed Pharaoh's heart to be hardened, that he would not allow the people of God, the Israelites, to leave. So God sent plague after plague in rapid succession. But what was very interesting, whereas Goshen, the land the children of Israel lived in, was in Egypt, when the plagues visited the land of Egypt, Goshen was spared because the blessing of God was over his people. If you followed the events of the plagues, what happened in Goshen and what happened to the rest of Egypt was like day and night. The blessing of God is the ultimate differentiator. When you read the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, whenever God's blessing befell a man, whenever God blessed a man or a woman, his blessing set them apart. Whether it was Adam and Eve, whether it was Cain and Abel, where God's blessing was over Abel, whether it was Jacob and Esau, where God's blessing and even Isaac's blessing was over Jacob, whether it was the judges in the Old Testament, whether it was Rahab, a nondescript lady, whenever God's blessing was over an individual or a household, it made a world of a difference. So God's blessing makes the world of a difference. Some people like to be differentiated on account of their race, on the account of their gender, on the account of their accomplishments. Those are differentiators in life. But the ultimate differentiator in life is the blessing of God. When God's blessing is over a man or a woman, it makes you stand out. And when others stand out, you become outstanding. And when others become outstanding, you become the standard measure. That's how God's blessing singles out men and women in community. I hope and pray this will make you desire the blessing of God. But number 2, God's blessings shield us from curses of men. God's blessing shields us from the curses of men. In Numbers chapter 23, from verse 20 to 21, is an account of 2 men whose names are somewhat similar, sound somewhat similar. One was Balak, the other one was Balaam. They played different roles. Balak was a king. Balaam was a prophet. Now, Balak was so scared of an advancing number of people who were in his territory, and he was scared that if they went to war, these people would actually defeat his people. So he hired a prophet called Balaam to come and pronounce a curse over the children of Israel in Numbers chapter 23. And on 3 occasions, every time Balaam attempted to pronounce a curse over the people of God, his pronouncements were just blessings. He would retreat, he would probably script a curse, but every time he would come before the nation of Israel to pronounce a curse over them, what proceeded from his mouth were blessings. Until he turned to the king and told the king, "I am sorry, king." Because the king was very frustrated on these 3 occasions. Every time he opened his mouth, all he did was just speak blessings. And the Bible declares in Numbers 23 that there is no divination over Israel. You see, the blessing of God shields us from curses from men. We live in a day and age where some evil men and women are given to pronouncing curses over others. But when you live under the blessing of God, the curses of men will not come your way. That is why you and I need to value the blessing of God and place a high premium on God's blessing. But thirdly, God's blessings break limitations over our lives. God's blessings breaks limitations of our lives. In 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 9 to 10 is the account of a man called Jabez. His name actually means pain. He was born in a very difficult circumstance because his mom had a very difficult time giving birth to him. And the best way to remember her experience was to call him after her experience. So she called him Jabez, which means pain. And this name limited Jabez in many ways. But one day, Jabez did something about this limitation. He called on God. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 9 to 10, there is a record of the prayer he made to God. "Oh, that you'd bless me and enlarge my territory. Oh, that your hand would rest upon me and that you'd keep me from pain." And the Bible says in verse 10, and God heard his request and granted it. The Bible does say that Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. 1 Chronicles is a very interesting account, particularly chapter 4. It's a list of genealogy. So-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so had 2 children, had 1 wife, had 2 wives, so-and-so begat so-and-so. That is a list, that is a record. But when you get to verse 9, that genealogy is interrupted and we are introduced to a man who broke limitations on account of God's blessings. Further down, a whole city was called Jabez after this man who had been limited by his name. What limitations may you be going through this day as we have this conversation? You need the blessing of God to break that limitation. So God's blessings break limitations of our lives. Show me a man or a woman who's enjoying the blessing of God, and I'll show you a man and a woman who knows no limits, like Eliud Kipchoge. But finally, why should anyone be so obsessed about the blessing of God? The Bible says, number 4, the blessings of God maketh rich, and they add no sorrow. God's blessings maketh rich, and they add no sorrow. God's blessing is not accompanied with sorrow. God's blessing is distinct from sorrow. If you think about an experience where you thought you were truly blessed, but that blessing came with a lot of pain and heartache? Probably that was not a blessing from God. Now, let me stop you right there, because some of you are thinking, okay, could it be that the pain and sorrow I'm going through is an indication that I am not enjoying the blessing of God? Don't get it twisted, particularly when it comes to relationships. Now, there's some pain and heartache that comes away because of the choices we make. But if you were to analyze the blessing of God, whether it be a relationship, whether it be resources, financial or otherwise, His blessings maketh rich. They add value. They do not devalue. They come with joy and happiness. They do not come with grief and sorrow. So it's important for you, before you make any move, to be sure that this is the blessing of God, because God's blessing maketh rich and adds no sorrow. This is the reason why you and I need the blessing of God. Number one, because God's blessing makes a world of a difference. But number two, the blessings of God keeps us from men's and women's curses. But fourthly, God's blessings breaks limitations of our lives. And fourthly, the blessing of God maketh rich and add no sorrow. I hope that I have persuaded you to long and desire for the blessing of God, because this is the life that God is inviting you to, the life that He blesses. God bless you richly. Please keep in touch with us through our social media platforms. We would like to know what God is doing in and through your life. We would like to engage further with you on this conversation, the life that God blesses. God bless you richly.